I knew something was off the second I saw my photo tacked dead center on the community bulletin board like a wanted poster. Not on the digital portal where every violation notice lived. Not in the monthly newsletter PDF. Just there on that cheap corkboard outside the pool house, centered between the faded no parking flyers and the out-of-date bake sale calendar. My name is Emily, treasurer of Willow Creek, HOA, for 3 solid years. I don't make noise. I don't run for president. I just keep the wires moving, the dues, collected the vendors, paid the reserve fund liquid, and every single fine process through the software I built from scratch because the last guy left it running on a spreadsheet that crashed every quarter. My clearance isn't some volunteer title. It's embedded in the bank portal, the state compliance filings, and the automated violation engine. Without my dual-factor credential, nothing clears legally. That morning I was early like always. I beat the espresso machine at the clubhouse and the retirees who love to gossip before their 9 a.m. walks. I logged and ran the reserve float validation, checked the auto-due transfers, and ran the reconciliation script I coded myself because the HOA management platform was basically a drunk Excel eating its own tail. Everything looked tight, the usual petty friction. One homeowner claiming his grass was exactly 3 inches when drone footage said 2.9, another trying to sneak a 6-foot flagpole when the covenant clearly said 4. I fixed it all before the first dog walker even hit the sidewalk. I even pre-cleared the quarterly landscaping sweep, just in case Karen, the new president, wanted to pull an early release to impress the board chat. I left nothing dangling, no alarms, no gaps, just the system humming under 12.6 million in annual velocity, all moving because I kept it moving. By the way, before I keep going, do us a favor, tap subscribe and smash that like button. 97% of you watch these HOA nightmares without subscribing, and every tap keeps the chaos coming. All right, back to it. By 9:06 a.m., I had double-checked every custodial ledger tag and queued the core vendor batch. My credential confirmed. Pre-signed valid. Risk thresholds cleared. I was wrapping up my second coffee when I saw her through the glass wall of the clubhouse office. Karen, the freshly elected HOA president, or as I called her in my head, the queen of pastel cardigans and passive-aggressive sticky notes. She wasn't talking. She was pointing directly at my photo on that board. I didn't flinch. I've dealt with her kind before. Smiles like currency charm, like a virus arrogance thick enough to float a yacht. She sauntered by my desk 20 minutes later with that fake laugh swagger and said, "Big day, Emily." I didn't respond, just nodded once and kept scrolling through my reconciliation buffer. She leaned closer and whispered, "Make sure everything's tidy. Some folks are watching now. Now you might think I'm paranoid, but I grew up in operations. We don't assume anything without receipts." And Karen wasn't the type to waste words unless she was trying to flex. So I checked the internal HOA feed. Nothing obvious. But then I passed by the pool house on my way to the archive printer and saw it. My headshot printed in black and white pinned dead center on the corkboard, bright red Sharpie, all caps, needs a lesson. Underneath, someone had drawn a little smiley face with X's for eyes. Real subtle, just enough to look like a joke if called out, but everyone knew what it was. A public branding. I stared at it for about 3 seconds, not in anger, not in fear, just calculation. They made their move, so I made mine. I walked back to my desk, calmly opened the HOA portal, and without blinking started the process. Disabled auto-sign triggers, revoked temporary routing approvals, paused the sweep queue, and then the kill switch flipped my credential to read-only and signed out. I closed every app, encrypted my compliance notes into an archive vault, and sent one email to Marcy, the board chair, with a subject line, "Access logged for treasurer transition." No body text, no signature, just the attached audit file. I dropped my key fob into an envelope, slid it into her clubhouse inbox, and walked out without a single goodbye. Not angry, not bitter, just done. And somewhere in the manicured streets, the machine started to shudder. They just didn't know it yet. The first time Karen cut me off in a board meeting, I let it slide. Not because I'm passive, but because I've seen Karens come and go like seasonal lawn fertilizer. Loud, overconfident, and somehow always elected before the ink dries on the ballot. It was a Thursday. Cross-departmental sync, me, Marcy, legal product, wait, no, the HOA equivalent, the architectural review committee, the enforcement team, and Karen. I was walking through the updated disbursement controls for the vendor migration Titan thresholds, dual sign-off embedded in the ledger, new compliance routing for international, and no wait for the landscaping contracts, grown-up infrastructure. Karen jumped in before I finished my sentence. Wait, sorry, she said, flashing that grin she probably practiced in her rearview mirror. Did you say manual routing logic like with folders and stuff? The room chuckled softly like people afraid to pick sides. I kept talking. It's ledger-based validation, not folders. The process ensures, she waved a hand. Emily, we're a modern community. This sounds like something you do at a bank in 1998. I felt Marcy shift next to me. She knew the system I built was the reason our last state audit passed without a single note. But she didn't say anything, and neither did I. Just stared at Karen, not blinking, memorizing the exact way her lips curled when she thought she'd scored points in a room that didn't know better. Later that day, I needed to pull a backup credential report from the admin office. Standard thing. I passed through their shared space, open floor, fake plans team photos like it was summer camp. And that's when I saw it again. My headshot, now laminated, pinned dead center on the corkboard, red Sharpie, all caps, needs a lesson. Underneath, the smiley face with X eyes had been upgraded with a tiny crown. Real subtle, just enough to look like neighborhood fun if called out, but everyone knew what it was. Public branding. I stood there for maybe 5 seconds, just long enough to feel the blood roar through my ears and then vanish again into that place where rage goes when it's too quiet to scream. I didn't rip it down. I didn't storm into Karen's office. I didn't send an email. I didn't even take a photo. What I did was walk back to my desk, sit down, and start writing the internal kill order for my own access. If they wanted to play games, they could do it without the woman who kept their financial lungs breathing. It wasn't the first time a smug little queen tried to humiliate me for the crime of knowing too much and smiling too little. But it was the first time I let them dig the hole themselves. Because what Karen didn't understand, what none of them ever do, is that an HOA ops authority isn't loud. It's quiet. It's systemic. And once it's gone, no amount of flailing fixes it. So I spent the rest of that afternoon doing what I do best, setting up the right levers for the fall. Unhooking myself quietly from every disbursement trigger. Setting compliance flags to gray. Locking audit trails with hashes that only I could reverse. A dozen tiny threads invisible to everyone else. But if you pulled even one the wrong way, the entire liquidity system would seize like a rusted engine. Karen could have just said thank you in that meeting. Could have nodded and moved on. Instead, she gave me a target, and I don't miss. The final straw wasn't the corkboard. It wasn't Karen's smug smirk as she walked past my desk later that afternoon, tossing me a finger gun and saying, all in good fun, right, Em? It wasn't even the passive-aggressive email from the enforcement committee that hit my inbox at 5:17 p.m. with the subject line performance culture alignment, asking me to swing by for a quick feedback sync. It was the spreadsheet, the one I opened for the 1,000th time, the daily liquidity master, the one nobody else really understood. It lived in a private vault folder linked to 3 separate compliance flags and 4 alert triggers. I stared at it for a long time that evening, not checking values, not reconciling, just looking. And then I did something I'd never done. I closed it. Not save, not sent, just closed. I shut down the terminal, logged out of the internal portal, and opened the HOA suite one last time. I walked through every scheduled payment, flagged every outbound vendor push, paused the auto sweep queue, and disabled the overnight float validation. A few clicks here, a few toggles there. Nothing loud, just precise. I rerouted my credential to read-only, not revoked, not deleted, just frozen. An elegant little deadlock that would keep the system humming until it needed my fingerprint. And when it reached for me, it would find silence. Then I pulled the final trigger. Set the outbound cash reconciliation batch to needs treasurer authorization. A box only I could tick. Not Marcy, not the board, not even the bank. Me, the name treasurer, written into policy, written by me, enforced by systems I designed because no one else ever cared to. The enforcement committee pinged me again as I was zipping my laptop into my bag. Hi, Emily, just following up on our earlier note. Would love to chat tomorrow. I didn't reply. Instead, I reached into my drawer and took out my key fob, that cheap laminated rectangle with the peeling corner and the barcode that had become muscle memory. I stared at it, then slipped it into a plain white envelope and scrawled one word across the front in black pen, for Marcy. Because she was the only one in that clubhouse who'd ever understood what I did, who'd actually listened when I explained why I'd built it the way I had. She trusted me because she had to, and maybe because she knew that while the presidents made noise, I made function. I walked the envelope to her glass-walled office. Lights off. She'd left early, probably to prep for the the annual meeting tomorrow. Poor thing didn't know her entire cash flow tree would be blank by sunrise. I slid the envelope through the mail slot in her door. No note, no final warning, no goodbye. And then I walked out. Not a soul looked up. Not from the architectural committee, not from enforcement, not even the intern who'd been shadowing me all week and still couldn't pronounce covenant without stuttering. I didn't need them to, because I wasn't walking out empty-handed. I was walking out holding the one thing no one in that neighborhood could buy, replace, or fake. Trust embedded in the bloodstream of the system. When I stepped into my car, I didn't feel victory. I felt clarity. The kind that comes when you know the game's already over and the other side hasn't realized they lost. I didn't slam the door on my way out. I didn't need to. The silence would do it for me. Karen came back from her power walk like she just closed a country club deal. Pastel visor tucked in her collar, voice raised, just enough to make sure people heard her say something about scaling community values and enforcing with intent. She paused by the clubhouse espresso machine, made some cringeworthy joke to the yoga mom half her age, and strutted back to her office like the second act of a sitcom no one asked for. Then, the pinging started, not her group chat from across the street. From the first homeowner, Sherry, probably looking confused at a bounce confirmation notice. She would have double-checked the payment ID, refreshed the portal, re-downloaded the remittance stub. Still red, still flagged. Then 2 more flags, then 4. By 1:17 p.m., someone from landscaping was standing up looking around saying, is anyone else getting the authorization required? Error. Karen, back at her desk, didn't even look up. A junior board member walked over to her office. Hey Karen, do you know if Emily's out today? She didn't miss a beat. Probably at yoga or something. Why? The board member hesitated. Because her sign-offs, not showing the liquidity dashboard, won't load past batch 2, and the vendor wires are failing checks. Karen spun in her chair like a discount reality TV villain. What does that even mean? It means nothing's clearing, the board member said slowly. No cash movement. Landscapers aren't getting paid. The reserve ledger is empty. Karen scoffed, stood, clapped her hands once like that would fix things. Okay, let's not freak out over a dashboard refresh. It'll sort itself. Another board member piped up, nervous younger guy. It's not a refresh, Karen. This is on the treasurer's side. Emily's credential was the disbursement anchor. Karen blinked like someone had just started speaking Greek. The what now? The disbursement anchor, the board member repeated. It's the policy lock-in on the float certification and batch trigger system. Without her credential, the payments can't move legally. Karen shook her head, smirking. Jesus, you people and your acronyms, just override it. Silence. And then we can't. That was when the air shifted. Not panic. Not yet. But that eerie static that settles when smug people realize they're not in control of the thing they thought they were. Karen tried again. Can't we just reroute it to another approver? The board member's voice was flat now. She was the only named treasurer on the account. HOA policy binds disbursement to that credential. Her signature key isn't just an ID. It's a compliance flag. The bank won't recognize any other credential unless she transfers it manually. She quit. Karen laughed, still waving it all off. She just walked out? Are you kidding? No one laughed with her. Another window popped up on the shared board screen. Daily liquidity, cert awaiting primary treasurer. Someone from legal poked their head in. Hey, why do we get a compliance alert from Coastal Bank? They're flagging our vendor disbursements as unauthorized. Karen turned a little pale, but still the smirk stayed like it was glued on. All right, everyone relax, she said. This is fixable. I'll ping Marcy. We'll loop in the bank. Get someone to proxy the approval. Probably just a permission thing. Sherry raised her hand, eyes still on her screen. Karen, the system just triggered a warning. Custodial verification expired. Human override not permitted. Karen stared at her like she was making it up. Then her eyes flicked to the pool house where the corkboard hung. And just for a moment, the smirk slipped. Not off, not gone, but cracked. The door slammed harder than usual. Every conversation in the clubhouse stopped mid-sentence like someone had hit mute. And then heels sharp, fast, deliberate cutting across the tile like a warning shot. Marcy, our board chair, didn't do drama. She was calm, tactical, surgically precise. But when she walked in that day, phone still clutched in her hand, her mouth drawn in a line that looked like it had been chiseled there, you could feel the temperature in the room drop by 10 degrees. She didn't say hello, didn't nod at anyone, just stood at the center of the floor and scanned the room like she was looking for a fire alarm nobody pulled. Karen for once didn't speak first. Marcy raised the phone and clicked it off speaker, her thumb shaking slightly as she ended the call. Her voice was low even, but there was a coldness to it that froze everyone where they sat. Where's your treasurer? Karen blinked like she didn't understand the words. Sorry, who? Marcy didn't move. Emily. Where is she? Karen let out a short laugh, all nerves. Oh, her. You think she took a personal day or something? The committee flagged some culture issue. Probably didn't like the feedback. You know how some people get when, stop talking, Marcy said. The room went still. She turned her head, slowly, eyes falling to the corkboard outside the pool house. From her position, it was just barely visible. The edge of the photo, the words, needs a lesson, still scrolled in red. Marcy stepped forward. 1 step 2. She pointed. That. What exactly did you tell the committee to do? Karen's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. I mean, nothing serious. Just a joke. I told them to give her a little push, like culturally. Get her to collaborate more. She's kind of lone wolf, you know, old school. Marcy turned back toward her so fast Karen actually flinched. She walked out, Marcy said, and in doing so took our cash controls with her. Do you understand what that means? She's not the only one who can move money, Karen protested. No, Marcy replied. She was the only one who legally could. People started standing now. Board leads enforcement analysts legal, one of them whispered, we try to force a proxy approval on the primary vendor queue. The system bounced, it said the credential hash was invalid. Marcy nodded slowly like it confirmed what she already knew. She wrote the hash logic, she said. She wrote the entire policy framework. She was the reason this community passed its last state audit. She was the one who built our custodial lock system after Coastal Bank flagged us for distributed risk. You don't replace someone like that with a memo. Karen was sweating now. Actually sweating. Okay, but can't we just get her back? I mean, she didn't give notice, right? That's a breach. Do you know what Coastal Bank just said to me? Marcy snapped. They said we violated our own internal disbursement policy, that our outbound liquidity was compromised, that our vendor chain is frozen until a credentialed treasurer revalidates the float. Karen opened her mouth again. Marcy cut her off. No, don't talk. She turned to legal. Start pulling the policy documents, every section she touched. Back to the board. Give me a full readout of the disbursement chain and freeze anything not pre-cleared. Then back to Karen. She stepped in close. Too close. And when she spoke this time, her voice was just loud enough for everyone to hear. You put her on a wall like a joke. You mocked the one person in this neighborhood who knew where the wires were buried. And now you're standing in the middle of a community that doesn't know how to pay its bills. She let that sit. No one moved. No one breathed. Karen looked around like someone would rescue her. No one did. Marcy's final words were quiet. Start over. Tell me exactly what you told the committee to do. And for the first time since she'd been elected, Karen didn't have a single thing to say. It started small, like a single thread unraveling in a tightly knit sweater. Just after 2 p.m., A vendor called one of the big landscaping ones. Big loud, no patience for excuses. Their wire hadn't landed. The payment confirmation was missing. You said funds would arrive by end of day. It's already past close here. The enforcement lead tried to stall, offered a tracking number, but the truth was there was no wire. It had never been sent. The system never triggered. By 2:17, another vendor was on the line. Then another, then the pool maintenance crew. We're seeing a critical mismatch. The board controller muttered, pale as a sheet. The payroll sweep for the part-time staff didn't run. Didn't run or didn't complete? Someone asked. Didn't run, she repeated. The automation flag was bypassed. It's hard-coded for treasurer sign-off. It's in read-only lock mode. The board huddled like a crime scene unit around the HOA interface, watching red flags bloom across the dashboard. The float was intact but inaccessible. The wires were queued but inert. The reserve reports were locked in draft status, awaiting a credential that no longer responded. And still Karen stood behind the group with that wounded, "This is overblown," look like someone had canceled her book club brunch. Marcy didn't yell. She didn't flinch. She pulled up the internal policy binder. Section 12.3b. Authorized Disbursement Officer. ADO credentials shall not be delegated, proxied, or reassigned without dual-party transition and compliant sign-off. Her voice cut cleanly through the panic. She's the ADO. The only one. But surely, Karen started. Marcy spun around. Surely what, Karen? That we can just wave a wand and reroute treasurer access because your ego couldn't handle being corrected in a meeting? Karen opened her mouth, closed it. Her credential wasn't just a login, Marcy continued. It was the linchpin of the system. Every vendor, push every HOA transfer, every reserve release passed through her authorization framework. You think that just disappears because the committee sent her a calendar invite labeled feedback session? Legal was scrambling now, pulling PDFs, cross-referencing compliance templates. The community manager wandered in confused, holding a phone like it was a bomb. We just got a call from a state HOA regulator. They asked why a 2.2 million reserve wire bounced from our outbound queue. Marcy didn't even blink. Tell them the truth, she said. Our treasurer walked because our president stapled her photo to a corkboard like a threat. The manager blinked. Is this a PR problem? It's a liquidity problem, Marcy snapped. And if we don't fix it in the next 12 hours, it becomes a default problem. Back in enforcement, someone gasped. Vendor 6 just emailed a litigation intent letter. They say failure to deliver within the agreed window triggers a 3% penalty on contract. Karen actually leaned on a desk for support, now her voice small. Can't we just restore her credentials somehow? No, the head of compliance muttered. The credential was tied to a biometric token. She revoked real-time access. Legally, we can't spoof without triggering an internal fraud flag. We'd be liable for every transaction afterward. And even if we could, the controller added, she's the only one who knows how the approval flow actually works. She coded it herself. The framework's not public. The board stared at the screen. Red boxes, frozen transfers, a blinking alert. Treasurer authorization required. Marcy exhaled through her nose, then looked at Karen. You understand now. Her voice was barely audible. I didn't know it would spiral. No, Marcy said. You didn't care to ask what she did. From the outside, the neighborhood still looked fine. Sleek website, funded, great PR. But inside, the arteries were clogged. Blood wasn't flowing. And everyone was starting to realize something chilling. Without Emily, they didn't know how to move their own money, and the engine was already seizing. By 3:40 p.m., the war room had shifted from panic to something worse, recognition. Marcy stood alone at the whiteboard, her sleeves rolled up, markers smudged on her wrist. Every single process, every wire path, ledger control flow, recalibration, internal reserve clearance was now outlined in black and blue ink, traced back to one name over and over again, Emily Tran. Her signature showed up everywhere, but never loudly, always in the metadata, always beneath the surface like a watermark, only visible when the light hit just right. Vendor 3 required her dual approval token. Pool maintenance, her routing logic. Reserve fund recon built on a timing structure only she understood, one that synced across systems nobody had thought to document. The pattern was surgical, not vengeful, not malicious, just meticulous. She hadn't sabotaged anything. She had simply walked away from the thing only she knew how to operate. Marcy had already tried twice to call her. Once on her cell, once on Signal, just in case. No answer, no read receipt, no reply. It wasn't a game, it was a message. Karen stood at the edge of the room, slumped like someone waiting for a verdict. Her arms were crossed, but not in confidence, in self-protection. She was no longer defending herself, just bracing. Marcy didn't look at her when she said, "The float's aging out in 7 hours. If we don't reconcile and trigger the ledger, we'll be flagged as non-compliant with every single partner bank." Someone from legal spoke softly. "Is that reversible?" Marcy shook her head. "Technically, yes. Operationally, no. The ledger wasn't just coded by her. It was written into our policy. She had final sign-off on disbursement logic. Every daily file had her fingerprint. You can't fake that. The banks won't accept a substitute." A pause. Then Karen mumbled it quiet, almost involuntary. "It was just a joke." The room fell even more silent than before. Marcy turned slowly, looking at her, like she was a cracked floor tile she just noticed for the first time. "A joke," she said flatly. Karen nodded. "I didn't think she was so quiet. I didn't know she was central." Marcy blinked once. No one's central until they're gone. Another beat passed. Then she turned back to the board and circled a section labeled Custodial Override Pathway Unlinked. She decoupled the fallback route, she said almost to herself. Months ago, after the state audit flagged redundant approvals as a risk vector, she rewrote the entire fallback schema. "I signed off on it. I didn't even think about what it meant if she left." The junior board member whispered, "Was it on purpose?" Marcy answered without hesitation. "No, it was just good policy. We got lean. We centralized. She became the structure. We didn't build around her. We built on her." Karen exhaled. "So what do we do?" Marcy finally looked at her again. "You start writing a statement," she said, explaining to the homeowners why dues are late, vendors are threatening litigation, and reserve wires are bouncing. "I didn't mean for this," Karen muttered. "No one ever means for failure," Marcy said quietly. "But it finds you anyway, especially when you fire the person holding up the ceiling because you thought she was in the way." Someone from enforcement peeked in face pale. The full board wants to schedule an emergency call. They're asking if Treasury has stabilized." Marcy didn't answer. She just looked down at her phone one more time. Still no reply, no missed call, no typing bubbles, just the name Emily. And beneath it, the call log from earlier today, 2:31 p.m. No answer. She stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone down and kept working. It was 11:24 p.m. when a message came through. Simple, direct, no subject line, no small talk, just one sentence typed with the unmistakable precision of someone who had spent the last 10 hours watching a neighborhood unravel from the inside. "Come back, write your terms, I'll sign." "Marcy." I stared at it for a moment, the soft glow of the screen lighting up my apartment like a stage spotlight. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel smug. There was no playlist blaring, no champagne chilling in the fridge, just the rhythmic click of my old wall clock and the hum of the laptop fan. I'd already known this was coming. They always think the system runs itself until it doesn't. I typed exactly 13 words in response. Reinstated, undernamed treasurer retainer. Contracted, not employed. Triple current comp, net 90. No emojis, no pleasantries, no follow-up. And 30 seconds later, a single PDF came back. Signed not by legal, not by the committee. By Marcy herself. DocuSign timestamp 11:26 p.m. Board chair override authorization. Emergency contract ratification. She hadn't even hesitated because she couldn't afford to. Inside that clubhouse, a dozen terrified board members were likely scrambling through compliance manuals, trying to find a workaround to a system they never bothered to understand. Karen was probably still in that glass conference room, surrounded by whiteboards filled with acronyms she'd once mocked. And me, I was sitting at my kitchen table in sweatpants, sipping stale coffee, legally holding the strings to the neighborhood's entire financial bloodstream. I didn't even ask to be reinstated. This wasn't a return. It was a rewrite. They didn't get Emily the volunteer any more the name they could staple to a corkboard and laugh about in closed-door meetings. They got Emily the retained treasurer, Emily the contractor, Emily the contractual necessity. No more bake sales. No more check-ins. No more Karen. I opened the HOA portal for my encrypted drive and reactivated the custodial credential. Everything came back online instantly. Float clearance vendor push reserve pre-cert. No one said thank you. No one had to because the lesson had landed. At 12:02 a.m., I received one final Slack message from Marcy. Confirmed. Cleared. Thank you. That was it. By the time a neighborhood filled up in the morning, the system would be humming again. Dues would post, vendors would receive their wires, the state regulator would stop asking questions, and I would be gone. Not invisible, just unreachable. On paper, I was still there, listed as the named treasurer in every disbursement file, every ledger, every compliance review. But I never set foot in that clubhouse again. Not once. I didn't need to, because from that point forward, I wasn't part of the machine. I was the person who wrote the manual and leased them the key. It was nearly a month later when the binder turned up. Some poor junior board associate fresh out of college, still trying to make a name for himself, had been assigned cleanup duty after a week of frantic policy rewrites. The order had come from legal. Audit every process Emily Tran ever touched, document the gaps, and figure out how the hell to prevent another collapse without triggering another compliance nightmare. He was elbow deep in old onboarding packets and dusty infrastructure maps when he found it wedged between two procurement manuals in the bottom of a filing cabinet no one had touched in years. Thick matte black, no branding, just a single white label across the spine. Key person dependencies. Treasury. The lock was cheap. Standard 3-digit dial, but taped beneath it was a posted in narrow, no-nonsense handwriting. Code 314. The kid opened it like he was defusing a bomb. Inside the binder wasn't full of charts or flow diagrams, just a few sparse pages. No fluff, no filler. And on the very first sheet, dead center in 14-point font, disbursement authority is non-transferable without original named treasurer credential. No exceptions, no asterisks, no fallback clause. The paper was signed by 3 people: the board chair, the head of compliance, and me. He stared at it for a long time, then quietly closed the binder and carried it to Marcy's office. She didn't look surprised when she saw it, just nodded once and said, "Put it on the shelf behind me." By then the dust had mostly settled. Dues had resumed. Vendors were back on track. The state rep had stopped calling. The homeowners got their quarterly update with a carefully worded paragraph about updated internal protocols to reflect evolving operational dependencies. No one said my name. They didn't have to. Everyone who mattered knew. Karen, she was still there technically, but the glass office she used to occupy had been moved 2 doors down. Her calendar was full of things like team culture deep dive and bias in org structure. No more access to finance meetings, no more budgetary approvals. She spoke less, smiled even less. Word around the neighborhood was she'd been reassigned to strategic support initiatives, which was HOA speak for stay in the corner and don't break anything else. The pool house wall completely bare now. The corkboard removed, new paint slapped on the drywall, like nothing had ever happened there. But above the coffee machine on the wall, just outside the break room, someone quietly taped up a photocopy. My photo, the same one Karen had tacked up, still grainy, still black, and white, still slightly off-center. The words "needs a lesson" had been carefully crossed out, and underneath and sharp as someone had written "lesson delivered." No one knew who posted it. Nobody touched it. But every time someone stood in line waiting for their latte, they saw it. And they remembered. Not the fallout, not the panic, not even the silence that followed. They remembered the quiet woman who never raised her voice, never made a scene, and still brought an entire system to its knees just by walking away. I never asked for revenge, but I got something better. I became a ghost with a signature and a rate they'll never forget.